My name is Christian Newman. I work for the Electric Power Research Institute. I'm a wildlife biologist that also happened to get a business degree at some point in time. And I like to tell the story that when I was in undergrad, I was taking a macroeconomics class, and I remember I was like, this is dumb. What am I doing? I will never, ever need to know anything about economics or costs. I'm going to be in the field. I'm going to be saving the animals, be saving the planet. And then as I got older and as I started to really sort of understand, unfortunately, a lot of the drivers that we face, sort of costs and decision making are very important to trying to, save species and conduct conservation. So 3 years ago, I joined EPRI. EPRI is the Electric Power Research Institute. We're an independent 501c3 that was born out of a tragedy. In 1972, there was a huge blackout in New York City, and the U.S. regulators were coming down hard on the utilities, the electric power utilities, to try to sort of proactively address issues, because up to that point in time, there hasn't been much sort of research, particularly around trying to protect infrastructure. And that's where EPRI started. So EPRI, we're a collaboratively funded organization. Electric power companies and other entities fund our research. We do government and state funding. We do go after those kind of funding, but a lot of the research is driven by collaborative funding from electric power utilities. And you can see that there's a broad range of folks contributing to the research. 52% investor-owned utilities, but a lot of public utilities, and then 31% of our members are international. So, and I will say that EPRI does a lot of different research, everything from how to build more efficient solar panels to trying to sort of address, acid rain and clean up sort of coal. But then we do quite a lot of environmental research, and that's where I fall. So we're about sort of advancing safe, reliable, affordable, environmentally responsible electricity for society. And we want to provide that leadership of science and technology. And so this is sort of the core aspects of what EPRI is about. And I think, one of the things that makes me excited and about EPRI, and it also sort of brings us to this partnership with ASU, is that, our whole mission is about bringing together scientists, engineers, and academics, as well as industry experts, to try to address, the issues that are faced by the electric power industry, but also by society. I mean, so, the electric power companies, their customers, are society. And so oftentimes what is being driven in terms of research is what is being requested by, the consumers or by the customers of these companies. So, it's really important for us to stay in touch with organizations like ASU and to follow and to try to sort of, where we can, help to drive research that is common to many of these organizations. Yeah, and so again, I kind of talked about this. And so my program is focused on protecting endangered species. One of the things that I'm very much, that we're very much sort of focused on right now is two things is one is trying to understand how we can better keep species from becoming listed, as well as once a species is listed, what can be done by electric power companies to either sort of help fill in the gaps around research, what kind of voluntary options, conservation options can they participate in? And again, we have to sort of understand that these companies, that their main mission is providing sort of electric power. So trying to find that right balance is often challenging for these companies when many of them potentially would like to sort of do more. And so why ASU? And Leah, every time I hear you speak and I talk to your colleagues, it's just amazing what you guys are doing in terms of being very forward-looking and very practical and trying to address some of the challenges that we have around sort of species. And so one of the things that was identified by the funders of my program was just trying to get a better understanding of what are the costs associated particularly on the private company side, of what are the costs in terms of complying with the Endangered Species Act, but also what are the opportunities in those costs, and trying to sort of balance that with potentially looking at what we can do more proactively. And so oftentimes when we talk about particularly, voluntary conservation actions, the companies say, well, we would like to, but, we need to justify to our upper management, that, this would be a good return on the investment, on our investment. Or that, by sort of investing in these conservation actions, it might help to sort of preclude future species from being listed. And then obviously, costs and money are sort of a common language across all, all parts of a private organization. And so, and I'm not picking on engineers, I'm not picking on sort of business professionals, but, we as biologists have to try to be able to sort of speak their language. And so the research that we're doing with ASU is helping to sort of do this. And so one of the first things that we've done with ASU is trying to better understand what are all the costs that go into an ESA, stands for Endangered Species Act, compliance. And so this is just the beginning of a framework that we've started, working through. And we're very excited to be, delving into this, because we're starting to really identify opportunities where, potentially money is not being spent wisely, or maybe we could, adjust, money to try to go to, instead of constantly trying to sort of monitor protected species, should that money potentially go and be better spent trying to do mitigation or trying to do habitat conservation. And so, but without knowing what these costs are, without having an understanding of what it is, it's very difficult to have those conversations. So I'm really excited to be working with ASU, and we are literally just sort of scratching the surface of what can sort of be done around these topics, and interested to hear from our other panelists tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christian. I didn't mention this, or maybe I did, and that occurred when I had cut out briefly. We'll have time for discussion with our panelists at the end. That was a very interesting presentation. Thank you, Christian. Laura, are you with us and ready? Are you with us?
I don't think we can hear you, Frank. You might be
Laura, Frank, Chris? Anyone?
I'm here.
I'm here and I'm speaking.
Definitely
but,
having some technical
I don't know why you can't hear me.
I can hear you now, Frank.
Oh, okay.
So
Can you hear me
why
now?
don't we wait for the technical issues to be resolved? Laura, Frank, or Chris, if you reappear, please chime in. Just let us know you're ready. I suppose in the meantime, just making good use of time, I'd welcome questions. Oh, I'm hearing that we can hear Frank. Frank?
Yeah, everybody hear me? Yeah.
No. Okay, well let's proceed with just having a discussion about some of the things that we've been talking about. I am very curious to hear. Oh, we can hear Frank. Okay, great. I'm going to be quiet. I can't hear Frank, but I'm going to go on mute and let us listen to Frank. I apologize.
So I hope you can all hear me now. Is that correct? Okay, good. Glad to hear it. So I'm going to test the system to its ultimate now by trying to share my screen. Who knows whether that will work? So let me try that. Can you see that? Good. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is a specific subset of the activities that we heard about just now from Christian, in that we want to be able to help the wide range of private sector operators understand how they can relate to biodiversity in a very specific way in terms of their impact on biodiversity as a result of their management actions at a scale that is comparable across the world. And we've been doing this in collaboration with a lot of academic institutions, as you can see here. I'm going to try and change my screen now. That didn't produce a result that I was hoping for, in that it hasn't changed this slide you can see, I think. Is that correct? Maybe I'll just try and talk through this while you're looking at the slide, the opening slide, in the hope that it changes with time. So, as everybody is aware, measuring impacts on biodiversity is very hard. Biodiversity has, first of all, three key components: species, genes, and ecosystems. And measuring any one of those things is pretty tricky. Ecosystems, there's a lot of debate about what constitutes an ecosystem and how you can draw boundaries around them. Nobody knows much about the genes at all. So we focused on the species angle because in order for you to measure the change in the status of biodiversity, you need a metric that is comparable and additive across sites, that is based on existing data, because you can't really go out and find new data on biodiversity, there's far too much of it. And also a way that you can measure changes in the status of biodiversity that is responsive at the speed of investors. So it operates on at very most a yearly basis. I'm going to try and stop sharing my screen and ask Leah if she can project on her screen. Can you do that, Leah? Maybe you can't hear me, so you can't do that. All right. Okay, I'm just going to continue with the slideshow, even though you can't see the slides. So the context, the policy context, is very interesting here as well, in that what we're looking at in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework is a need for companies and for countries to be able to identify how it is that they've contributed to a global target in biodiversity. The reason, as we heard earlier, that we haven't been able to achieve the global biodiversity targets up to now is that up to this point, the responsibility for delivering biodiversity outcomes was placed only on countries, when of course we all know that the most important impacts on biodiversity come from economic activity driven by the private sector. But in order to measure that, we need to know what the biodiversity equivalent of a 1.5 or 2 degree change is for climate. And that's a very tricky thing to figure out, as I said. So now I'm going to try and advance my slides. No mind. So the way this is happening currently is through something called the Science-Based Targets opportunity. And the Science-Based Targets, as they do with climate, for biodiversity, we're aiming to allow specific actors, so state and non-state actors, give them the opportunity and responsibility to identify how their specific actions they take in specific places can contribute towards a possible global biodiversity target, which is currently formulated as halting loss by 2030 and restoring biodiversity by 2050. So, as I mentioned, these science-based targets for biodiversity have to be measurable at all scales, so you can measure them at a site scale, at a country scale, and globally. You have to be able to compare these things between sites. You can say this investment will generate a better outcome than this one over here. Biodiversity that needs to be conserved. You can add them up to make a global target, and you can also disaggregate them by contributor. So you can say this contribution from company X is different or the same or better than this contribution from company Y. So the way we focus this is by looking at the threats that apply to species. And we do this in two ways: the threat abatement, that is to say, the extent to which you reduce the intensity of threats at a particular site. And secondly, how it is that the restoration of ecosystems can contribute to the likelihood of species persistence. I'm going to try and share my screen again and see if that, here we are, okay.
Hey, Frank, I don't know, I can actually hear you now and I have your slides up, so.
Oh, great, okay. I'm on the specific science-based targets for biodiversity slide. Yes, you got that.
Okay, and I see yours. I see yours now too. Nope, it went away. I'll keep mine up. Okay, so I'm on slide 4. Did we lose Frank?
Entirely.
Oh my God. Okay. Let's just give Frank another minute to join us. I really apologize. I had no idea this would be so challenging. And I appreciate everyone hanging in there for this bumpy ride.
Haley, we're being resilient.
Thank you, Christian.
Just because our session is so popular. We're
Yeah, maybe. Let's see here. I don't want to just I don't want to give Frank's talk for him, and I don't want to end this. I don't want to just jump to another talk. So I think let's give Frank 1 or 2 more minutes. If there are any questions in the meantime, please jump in.
And I think the easiest way to take the questions would be on the chat, and then
Thank you.
And we'll talk about them here. We had one comment about how it is difficult to protect species across borders, and in that way, the international companies who kind of don't, move beyond and across these borders can succeed where individual nations can't. It's a pretty interesting perspective, I think.
Christian, I think you might have a good answer for that. There's another one for you, Christian, about the compelling reasons for the private sector to engage.
Am I back?
Oh, oh, yay, you're back. Okay, Frank.
I had to relaunch the my whole system. So anyway,
yes.
Yes, let's start with the slide you have there, Leah.
Okay.
I just need to advance to it so I can read it. So the species threat abatement and restoration metric is a collaboration that we've been developing between the organizations you see at the bottom of the screen there. And the way I've approached this is that we're breaking out the amount of change in species extinction individual initiatives can make through the mitigation of existing risk factors, and also, as I said, through assessing the contributions of habitat restoration. The underlying data set is the red list of species, which I'm sure you know has covered over 100,000 species and has been assessed by in the order of 20,000 scientists. So it's the kind of data set you just can't replicate. You can't build that from scratch. If we go to the next slide.
Okay, we're on to slide 9.
Yeah, thanks. So STAR fills that set of conditions that I mentioned earlier. It allows you to compare across investment targets, and it allows you to add things up and then disaggregate them. And it also, because it's measuring change in intensity of threat, it can respond at the rate at which investment is moving. Next slide. And what you do for STAR is, for the particular application at a site scale, for instance, you would look at 3 phases. You'd start by estimating based on public information what the potential is for generating species extinction risk reduction. You then refine that to the baseline ex-ante estimate, baseline ex-ante value, which you validate by knowing what the species that are present in a site are and what the threats that are applying at the site. And then you can set a target against which your performance can be monitored over time. And this allows you to bring in a whole series of extra factors, for instance, the cost of different interventions to reduce threats. You can develop a kind of cost curve for the kinds of interventions based on the amount of extinction risk they're going to reduce, they're going to provide, but also how much they're going to cost and where you can source that money from, if it's from public money or private money. So you can do all kinds of interesting analyses to figure out how it is that your investment would be best deployed. If you go to the next slide, I wanted to mention very quickly how it is that we're collaborating with universities here. The University of Newcastle have been heavily involved in actually the development of the metric, and also through the IUCN SSC post-2020 task force, and also the road testing of the metric in different places and with different companies. With Arizona, we're working to figure out how you can invest across different regions of Colombia in order to evaluate what kinds of extinction risk reduction you can generate with those different investments. And with Cornell University, we're focusing more on the finance sector to figure out how you can select portfolios and then measure the impacts across portfolios using STAR. Next slide. Just a quick note on the country level. There's a project we have funded by the French government called BioDev 2030, which is looking at developing national commitments to the post-2020 biodiversity framework in collaboration with the companies that are present in those countries. And the BioDev 2030 website has more detail on that. Next slide. At the company level, we're working with apparel companies. I can't go into specifics here just because these projects are underway at the moment, but a lot of very important apparel companies and also commodities conglomerates to look at corporate footprints. And the way you work through this is you identify the impact of individual projects where commodities are being produced, and then identify where it is that you can orient your sourcing decisions in order to minimize that impact, either by helping your suppliers reduce their individual impact or by sourcing from some other place. We're doing this with finance companies, looking at how asset managers who buy shares in lots of companies can orient their investments to minimize their exposure to biodiversity related risk by pricing capital that they're using to loan to these companies according to the amount of biodiversity risk that the investee companies are exposed to. So this gives you a way of, for instance, orienting the financial exposure of an asset manager in order to maximize the contribution to the post-2030 global biodiversity strategy targets. Just to give you a very quick idea of what happens at a site scale, this is a study we did of a sustainable a rubber plantation. You can see it's adjacent to a national park, and you can see the orange areas are where you'd want to invest to mitigate threats, particularly incursion into the park and hunting. And the blue areas are places where you can generate extinction risk reduction through restoration, in particular in areas where there's species that that would benefit most from that. There's a little area of bright red over here where there's a species that occurs, which is very rare, right on the edge of the concession zone. Next slide. So that's the summary of the presentation. The methodology and approach for STAR will be published in the next month or two in Nature, Ecology and Evolution. It's under review at the moment, and that'll tell you a lot more about the detail of the actual approach, the methodology for calculating STAR values, and also a great deal of background information about the conditions under which STAR can be used. I'm sorry for all the technological hiccups there, and I'm sorry if we went over a little bit, but that's the current story.
muted, Leah.
So now we
This-
can't hear you, Leah.
You can't hear me.
No.
No.
Yes, we can now.
Oh, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Frank. Brilliant presentation. While we're all here, I'd like to pass it over to Laura and hear about work from the bear end of things.
I don't think we can hear you, Laura.
No. No, can't hear you. So, Laura, what I did was I clicked the refresh button on my browser, and that got me back in. So that might be worth trying.
Chris, would you like to jump in here while Laura gets back on?
Yeah, it's my turn to see if the internet's going to treat me any better today than it has the others. Okay, so let me know if you can all see this. Should be some cacti. No?
Chris, I can barely hear you.
Can you see the presentation?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Like me to project it from my end? Oh, here comes Laura. Laura, are you with us? We can't hear you. No. Laura, I think we're going to go ahead and let Chris present while we try to rectify the tech issues. If you'd like, Chris, I could project your slides from here. Would you like that?
Yeah. I think
Okay.
that's what we're going to need to do.
Okay. Let me get this going.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Laura, feel free to just keep talking and seeing if when we're going to hear you. Okay, Chris, let's see. Let's see if this works. You all seeing Chris's presentation now? Okay, passing it over to Chris.
So I still can't see my presentation, but I know what it looks like, so I can go from there. So my name is Chris. I'm Chris Barton. I work with Leah at ASU. I also work in the president's office, and I am a PhD student studying international development. And today I want to talk a little bit about our CBO's sort of theory of change around knowledge co-production and these partnerships we've been talking about this whole time. So if we move on to the
Somebody's typing very loudly. Sorry.
Are we on the second slide? Cool. I'm going to assume we're on the second slide and just talk through it. So our theory of change around
completely dropped off? I'm not seeing him. I have his presentation here. Laura, can we hear you yet? Thank you guys so much for bearing with us. This is very difficult.
So, Chris, if you can still hear us, I refreshed using the refresh button on my browser, and that seemed to work, getting me back in.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we have lost Chris and Laura. Laura, any sound yet? No. Okay. Here we are. Did folks have questions? Oh, here comes Chris. Good.
Hello, can anyone hear me or see me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yay, okay. So I can't see anything else. So if I'm just gonna talk through this, and if somebody else pops in, I will yield the floor to them. But I'm just gonna keep going. So there's a couple of outcomes that we work towards at CBO. The first one is knowledgeable science or actionable science. And the idea here is that scientific knowledge can be difficult to find, understand, and use for those outside of the academy. And we would like to create co-produced knowledge with those outside the academy that is actionable, accessible, and useful, which is the primary point. And so some of our current work focuses on what are individual and institutional best practices for creating actionable science. And we have a nice figure that shows how the actions of individuals and organizations influence the production of this type of knowledge. But you can't see it, so I'm just going to keep going. Our second outcome that we're focusing towards is harmonized tools. And the idea here is that the decision-making tools in business and in conservation can sometimes suggest contradictory actions. So we want to build tools that integrate business needs with conservation needs. And so our current work in this area, we're working on enhancing some common business tools with insights from conservation, so that these are tools that businesses already know how to use, but now they're a little bit more effective because they can take into account conservation outcomes as well. And an example of this is some of you might know Porter's 5 forces analysis. When I was in B school, this was a kind of fundamental concept that we were taught. And so we expanded Porter's 5 forces analysis, which shows why certain industries are more profitable than others, with an understanding of how biodiversity shapes the operations of a business. So we came up with 5 more forces that are relevant to biodiversity that shape how a particular industry is or is not profitable. And so the idea is that this can be picked up and dropped in the exact same place that businesses already use the original tool, but is still a bit more comprehensive. So our third outcome, building on that, is harmonized metrics. So and the problem here is that businesses and conservation sometimes value the natural world in different ways. And so what we want to do is develop metrics and valuation methods that capture both the necessary business outcomes and the conservation outcomes that we're trying to head towards. So this is asking questions like, how can businesses develop biodiversity metrics that can be integrated into their operations and then can be relevant to them and useful to them, while also being understandable to the broader conservation biodiversity world and relevant to them. So Leah talked earlier, or I actually don't know if we got to the slide, but Leah was supposed to talk earlier about this paper that just came out, which gives a process of how a business can develop biodiversity metrics that are unique to its operations and are integrated into its decision-making processes. And then lastly, we want to have effective partnerships, and the issue here is that while partnerships between businesses and academia are very productive, they have a unique set of challenges that have to be managed. So we hope to develop a toolbox that can be used to create and maintain these types of partnerships. So our current work on this is around the knowledge partnership scorecard is what we've created it. And the idea here is that we took the best practices of these sorts of partnerships and we made it into a tool that can be used as a framework when establishing the partnerships to make sure that they're going to be successful over the long term, a diagnostic tool for figuring out what's going wrong when the partnerships are hitting rough patches, and a way to benchmark and assess the effectiveness of the partnerships across the entire organization. So this is a tool that we built here at ASU. We are beta testing it here at ASU, but we actually are offering it to any institution that is interested through the University Design Institute. So if that sounds like something exciting, reach out to us. And then the last thing, building off of that, is that co-production requires partnerships. In order for us to be co-producing knowledge with businesses, we need to be working with businesses such as the three that we've been talking with here. And so our kind of ask around all of this, since we're at the UNGC, is if any of this sounds interesting, if any of this seems like it might potentially be useful to your business, or you just you have another issue that you'd like to talk about, reach out to us. Our goal here is to make sure that we build mutually beneficial partnerships with industry and that everyone comes away happy and knowing more than they did when they entered. So those are our email addresses. If you have any questions or comments or insights, or just want to talk about how this platform doesn't work, send us an email and we'll be happy to commiserate.
Impressive talking without your slides, but I think it went swimmingly. I appreciate that excellent presentation. Laura, how are we doing for sound at this point?
Nope.
No sound.
I'm sorry, Laura.
Laura, I do have your presentation. Would you like me to just kind of scroll through it, and people could put comments in the chat?
This is another reason to reach out to us. If you feel like you've been gypped and you want a third presentation, let us know.
Yeah, we might have to do a redo here.
Well, I mean, maybe it looks like we do have some people attending. Does anybody have any questions or any comments or anything that they'd like to discuss?
And I'm going to just put up Laura's her PowerPoint. Laura went to the trouble of preparing for this, and how unfortunate that that we can't hear her, but we can look at her beautiful slides. Let's see. Laura, would you like me to say anything as I flip through these? So I'll just add a few comments as I briefly speak on Laura's behalf here. Another partnership we have is with Bayer Crop Science, and it's been a really fascinating journey working with Bayer. Laura is in regulatory and science affairs. One of the big challenges is pesticide risk assessment.
Well, until Leah comes back, we got a comment on the side from Lion, who likes to quote the co-production of knowledge requires partnerships, and that this goes for the co-production of solutions for environmental challenges as well. And yes, we agree entirely. And part of the reason why we're focusing on knowledge production is because, of course, we are a university, and that is a lot of what we do with our research, and is a lot of what our partnerships are based around. But the end goal is the solutions of environmental challenges, and part of our work around making actionable science is just that. It's that how do we co-produce knowledge that is directed to specific challenges that we want to address, rather than just creating knowledge and tossing it out in the world for people to pick up. So we want to focus on the specific issues that plague our world and find partners that can bring relevant knowledge to the table, and then work with them to co-produce both, an understanding of what the issue is and how to get out of it.
There was can you guys hear me okay? Can you hear me?
More comments?
Okay. There was a question earlier on, what are the most compelling reasons for private sector to engage?
Yeah, so there was a comment earlier on the role for citizen science, and for other institutions such as museums, and a big part of co-production is not just with industry; it's with all other segments of society. So, a lot of the citizen science initiatives tend to look at the population and the citizens as basically data collectors. You send the citizens out into the world with like a sensor of some sort, or to count birds, and then that's the data that the real academics use to produce the knowledge at the end. The co-production approach would be more like work with them from the very beginning, thinking about what problems they are interested in and how they can help in not just collecting the data, but in the whole process, from designing the problem to doing the analysis to pushing the results out into the world to using them. And turns out to be a really effective model for addressing environmental issues. In Louisiana, by where the Shell refinery plant is, there's this great example of a citizen science community who, they worked with some academics to figure out what the air pollution levels are. And they, designed the whole scientific process and came up with an entirely, self-designed process for figuring out what they were breathing. And they were able to work with academics to make sure that it was methodologically sound. But then they did all the work, and they came up with this conclusion about what they were breathing, and this was contrary to what Shell was saying was in the air. And so they were able to kind of use science to use the co-production of knowledge to actually confront a polluter. So I got a question. What do we think about business participation in environmental education for schools? Enhancing community participation in citizen science is also a good way to co-produce the knowledge while at the same time reducing costs. So the first question, what do we think about business participation in environmental education for schools? I think that the key word there is participation, going back to co-production, right? Like the the goal of co-production is the basic understanding behind co-production is that there is important knowledge to be had from all perspectives, even the perspectives that we might disagree with at first glance. And so where participation in education gets perhaps problematic is when it's not co-produced, when it's not a collaborative creation of knowledge that is then being shared, but it's just one stakeholder. And that goes equally, in the other direction too. You don't want any one stakeholder, whether it's a business or a civil society group or anything, being the only one producing the knowledge. You want there to be collaboration around it. Leah, you're back. We can't hear you though. I can't hear you, Leah. I'm sorry. Could anyone else hear Leah? Thank you, Bradson. Oh, I heard her click. I think you might be on there. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you clicking. Yes.
Oh, good.
And as soon as she's here, she's gone again. Yeah. So Christian, did you have a comment on any of this?
Sure. Yeah, there was a, can you hear me okay, first of all? Yep. Can you hear me? Okay. Some of us can hear, Chris, you can't. Yeah, there was a question early on, what are the most the private sector to engage? And I posted a report that that we just last week, looking at the barriers and incentives for particularly youth-based electric power companies to participate in voluntary conservation actions. And so there's a lot of reasons why companies potentially would engage, and particularly if there are some activities that already align the things that they're already doing. So, a good example would be electric power companies who maintain, right-of-ways under transmission lines. And so, there probably are opportunities where they're already managing for early successional habits.
If anyone is interested in learning more about this model of co-production, there's a lot of great work out there. I might suggest starting with a woman named Sheila Jasanoff, who wrote this book that I just dropped in the chat called States of Knowledge. This idea of co-production is something that can be taken in very, very interesting ways, and Sheila does a lot of that. So just in case you're interested, that's a good place to start, or reach out to us and we'll continue the conversation.
Different individuals can hear different things. I think Christian was answering a question, and that's fantastic insight, Chris. Christian, please continue.
That's good. I was just trying to sort of give some examples of where companies would engage. And so, what we found in this report was if there were opportunities that kind of aligned with what companies are already doing in terms of, let's say, managing, their lands in a certain way that, would make it sort of easier. The other sort of key thing was, interesting enough, that a lot of the companies, they'd be more likely to participate if they, if they potentially, there was more sort of recognition around it from either regulators or other sort of NGOs or stakeholders for the work that they're doing. And then also, oftentimes, if they're going to do something, and again, this is having to do with U.S. endangered species laws, if they could potentially get credit for going ahead and doing something now. So if a species was to become sort of listed, they could sort of build up, credits if a species did become listed. The other interesting thing about this report was, and I think this probably goes for all, all companies, all private industries, is when you think about the electric power industry, not all electric power companies are the same. And so, the ability to do voluntary conservation action also somewhat aligns with what type of company they are. And so, interesting enough, investor-owned utilities potentially have a lot more flexibility to participate in voluntary conservation actions versus a public utility, where operating as a not-for-profit organization, where they have to justify all of their costs to their either to the regulators or to their to the public that are essentially funding their activities. So it's a complicated question, but there's definitely opportunities for the electric power companies to participate in some of these things, and that's some of the work that we're trying to do with ASU and others.
Additional questions? I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get Laura on the phone. Laura, I don't know if you could hear me, but I did just send you my cell phone number. If you could call it, and I'll put you on speaker and we'll run through your slides. In the meantime, other questions? Thank you so much for your patience, everyone. Oh, I think Laura will be calling shortly. It looks like she has her phone. Maybe Laura's talking to technical support. I did pass along my phone number, Laura, so do feel free to call, and we could put you on speaker. Additional questions or comments or insights? I'm very curious to hear from everyone on how can we begin bridging this divide and cultivate this fruitful type of co-production in achieving biodiversity outcomes. Oh, okay. I think I'm going to be able to get Laura on just one moment. Hi, Laura. Can you?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Can everyone hear Laura now? Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I am so sorry. This is terrible. I was in some earlier sessions today, and they seem to be, flowing very well. I think it's the PowerPoint that's holding us up. So we live and we learn.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate your patience and tenacity. I have your first slide up, so Go for it.
Yeah,
We're all yours.
everything.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being staying on the session. I'm so grateful for your patience, and I'm really happy to be part of this session. And I won't speak very long, but I did want to really thank Leah and her team for working with Bear. And I can just, if you can show, maybe the second slide, because I think you're already sharing the PowerPoint. I just wanted to talk about my science journey, that I moved from doing environmental chemistry work to USDA, where I was there for 20 years working on conservation practices. And then I lead to Bear sort of as a second career. And now I get to do something like this of working with universities and scientific society. So the main thing I want to highlight, other than the work with Leah, if you go to the next slide, is the commitment that Bear has made to biodiversity. And there's a number of categories of commitments that are listed here, and just a sort of a single example of each of those categories underneath. But I would encourage you to look at the website listed for many more details. But I think this is exactly the type of thing that Leah is talking about, is that, companies like Bear really care about the environment, and we're moving into a new phase of how corporations can collaborate on issues like biodiversity. And if you think about it, farms are all over the world, and Bayer is the largest company in ag now. And so even small things can have huge impacts over time. And when it comes to endangered species, I think farmers want to protect endangered species, and so if we can make it easier for them, we should be doing that. And we understand.
So close.
The screen back. Hi, everyone. We're back.
So I think I'll just wrap up and let you take it from here.
Okay, go for it. Can everyone hear us? Laura is still speaking.
Can you guys hear? Yeah. Okay, so I'll just wrap up and say that we really appreciate the work that Leah and the center are doing with BEAR on Endangered Species Act, and helping us try to make some better and more efficient decisions on Endangered Species Act regulations. So thank you, Leah, for including BEAR. Maybe we'll have a redo at some point, and we can and I can give you the full presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Fascinating work that we're doing together, and I appreciate your patience and bearing with us on this very challenging platform.
Yeah.
So
okay.
yeah,
I'm gonna hang out now. You can keep going.
Okay. Thank you, Laura.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Let's take a few questions if everyone is still here. Let's see. I think Chris might be fielding the question. Oh, who's in the audience? So we have an ASU student. We have a Canadian working on ocean conservation. Thank you. Thank you, both Bronson and Lynn, for your patience and enthusiasm.
So I see that there's a, this is a question that Christian answered, the most common reasons for the private sector to engage in co-production.
Chris, I can't hear you very well. If you could speak up.
Sorry, I see there's a question farther up. It says, could you elaborate on your most common reasons for the private sector to engage in co-production? But I see that's perhaps a question that Christian already answered. Yeah, okay.
About this for hours, but given our technical issues, I'm inclined to wrap up. We have included our email contacts, and I hope that we'll be able to reach out to everyone and continue this. I will be planning a redo of this. I really appreciate the panelists putting together these excellent presentations, and for your time, especially this awkward evening dinner hour for many of us. So your input and insights have been really valuable, and thanks everyone for persevering through this challenging platform. And I will assure you that the next time we do it, it'll be more smooth sailing. So perhaps we're demonstrating our tenacity and working together to overcome these hurdles and solve problems. So thank you very much, everyone. I do see another question for Chris, so I'll let Chris quickly answer that, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Oh, it was just somebody responding to my question of who's in the audience.
Okay, got it. Thank you. All right, well, I think we should go ahead and wrap up. Appreciate all of your interest, and we'll look forward to continuing the discussion. Look forward to hearing from everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.